My name is Zachary Conan, and if you enjoy my thoughts, make sure to subscribe to my channel. My two absolute favorite episodes of Star Trek Enterprise, which by the way is my second favorite Star Trek series, are two episodes called Fusion and Stigma. Both are stories from Brannon Braga and Rick Berman, the creators of the show itself, and Fusion and Stigma Fusion actually being season 1, episode 17, and Stigma being season 2, episode 14, which oddly enough correlates to Valentine's Day, 214, considering the subject material. So I had my friend Craig, who is here with me. We watched both of these episodes because they are continuations of each other, even though they happen more than a year later. In Stigma, we see T'Pol meeting a group of Vulcans who essentially are like Kabbalist mystics. They're more mystic with their Sirach teachings. They're trying to experiment with emotionality and with meditations, and some of them can perform mind melds. And this is, of course, a prequel to Star Trek, the original series, and the reforms of the Vulcan command from people like T'Pau, where they actually did this mind melding practice correctly. And if you don't do it correctly, it could lead to contracting a disease known as Pinar syndrome, which ostensibly is a huge metaphor for AIDS. And in Fusion, T'Pol is manipulated by Talaris, one of these Vulcan hippies, essentially, manipulated by her throughout the episode. He plays on her curiosity, her natural interest in like more mystical or even more emotional aspects of herself. And it ends up with them initiating a mind meld, him getting consent, and then him continuing to basically rape her when she no longer wants to be involved in the mind meld. He continues, tells her that she's shameful, and essentially rapes her. And these actions are followed up on in Stigma, where the real crux, the real moral dilemma sets in, because she has contracted Pinar syndrome, which has a very bad, obvious stigma with the Vulcan people because it affects a small subset of people who can perform these mind melds. And the metaphors are very clear. They're talking about homosexuality. They're talking about junkies and drug use. They're talking about the undesirables of their culture. So they're not very interested in finding a cure, and they believe that everyone who has it is living indecently. And the moral dilemma comes in when they find out that T'Pol has the illness, and T'Pol has to... what she decides to do is to... she's left with nothing else but to admit that she has it. She's going to lose her position aboard the Enterprise, but she refuses to tell them how she got it. She will not say that it was forced upon her, that she was essentially raped, and she will not do that because by persecuting, by punishing, and by coming forward and calling out her rapist, she will actually be stigmatizing a whole group of people who have done nothing wrong, who are just born a certain way. But she would be giving like a villainous face to this disease. So it's an incredibly complicated question of every rapist deserves to be punished, but there's even a greater good, an incredible amount of heroism into Paul's character in this episode, because I can't think of a more complicated thing, and I can't think of more of a braver thing to do, because I would obviously want to punish anyone who wronged me or wronged someone I love, but I completely understand and I admire, and I think it's one of the most heroic acts ever committed by a Star Trek character to keep that in, to not tell that, to not say that you were raped, to not say that you were forced upon, that you were violated in the most sensitive way, because by doing so, you will completely stigmatize an entire group of people needlessly. Like, their suffering is more than yours, and it goes with the Vulcan edict as well of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It would feel good to have that personal satisfaction and that revenge, and justice should be meted out on Talaris, on the rapist. But at the same time, there are so many other people who will suffer as a consequence of your own justice as well. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, it's very complicated. I think it's really easy to understand both her feelings towards it and the captain's feelings towards it, because, like the captain said at the end of the episode, he said that he was like selfishly happy that it happened, because it meant that, not only is she going to get help, but she wouldn't have to lose her position. So
happy that the hearing happened, not happy that the rape happened, just to be perfectly clear to everyone.
yeah,
Yeah.
happy that she's not,
Well, happy that that Eurus went against her wishes and said that it was forced upon her against her wishes. Happy that it was brought out in the open that she was raped, even though T'Pol does not against her wishes. And I totally
and what's really
respect
upsetting is that guy lost his position due to outing himself as one of these minorities. Because obviously nobody knew that he was one of these minorities, and they didn't really give a name to it. So the mind melders,
I know, they're like maybe Sirenites or something like that, but not in these two episodes. They did not distinguish them by a name.
Yeah, they basically just called them the minority,
Yeah.
and said that they were people who are able to mind meld.
And later on, I think that they called them Sirenites, but right now
okay.
there's no name for them.
Yeah, but regardless, he put himself out there because he felt like the truth had to be known, and he lost his position, and he was a really well-known, esteemed physician, and
Absolutely.
he basically lost his whole life's work because of how he was born, more or less. But yeah, and you could tell that the show was definitely trying to be metaphorical, or metaphoric. And we were saying that there's probably a handful of people who are literalists and watched this show and just took it for directly what it said. But
Berman and Braga were very heavy with it. I mean, like
the very last line of the show was like, maybe this will help people speak out, and it's like they obviously were saying that directly to the audience, and it had nothing to do with the two characters on screen.
And even in the Fusion episode, the language they were using to me was unmistakable. Of you forced herself on you, she asked you to stop, and you didn't stop. And him saying, "Well, she this is what she wanted. Like she consented to it, she asked for it." Like it was to me I think it was a very good metaphor, and I think it was as loud as it needed to be, because I do believe there was a lot of thick-headed people out there who just couldn't see the metaphor in this one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a metaphor in every Star Trek, so I don't understand how they even watch the show.
I'm curious if the side story in this had a purpose in relation.
Well, in my opinion, okay, so there's two separate side stories. Let's focus on the one in Stigma, because that's a bit more fleshed out as a side story. The one with with Phlox's wife, who is interested in experimenting and, let's say, sexually socializing with Trip. I think that it's there for a purpose, yes, because it's an episode about sexuality, and it's an episode about the almost the terrors of sexuality, and I think that Berman and Braga are also trying to say, at the same time, sexuality isn't bad, and at the same time, women aren't these precious little things as well. There are women out there who know exactly what they want. Like there's a thing as a healthy sexually adventurous woman, because I think that they were like kind of juxtaposing the idea of, yes, T'Pol is more reserved and more isolated, and there are specific women like that, just like there are specific women in relationships that are sexually healthy, as opposed to T'Pol's situation, which is sexually terrifying that she was in. And yeah, I thought that was perfect. What about the side plot in Fusion? And in Fusion, it was good because it was from the point of view of Trip talking one of the kind of Vulcan mystics into calling his father when his father is dying. That's juxtaposed to show you that, I mean, if our only point of view, a point of reference into this new kind of Sirenite cult was Talaris, the manipulator and rapist and like abuser of women, we would not think very highly of that species. But like in Stigma, You know, they're like, they're not all Talaris. They're not all these bad people.
Yeah.
And if we didn't see that other version who was really interested in learning about like human life and human culture and stuff, we would probably have a pretty skewed image of these more mystical Vulcan people. But because they
That's
juxtaposed it with a good character, we can walk away from it going, there's hope in these people, obviously.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it that way. I was trying to figure out, like, I guess the story content and how it related as opposed to the purpose of the story content.
Right.
That makes a lot more sense to me now that they're just trying to show you that, you know, these people are vulnerable themselves. They're not just aggressive and trying to push themselves on people with their beliefs.
There are bad, flawed, evil people in every place. And then when you go to Stigma, you can also expand it to there. It's not just Talaris, like someone who deserves punishment, but it would be someone like that very nice Vulcan who is very kind of innocent and naive.
Yeah, and I don't think they pushed it too hard, but, like, there was a bit of, like, almost like religious differences, kind of like sex within religion.
That's why I keep saying Kabbalist mystics, because it's almost like these regular ones. The old, I see the Vulcans in the Enterprise in the original series as metaphors for Jews, specifically Israelites. So I would look at the Vulcan High Command here as like a pre-reformed like Israel idea, which they are, because T'Pau reforms them and teaches people how to mind meld correctly, and even cures T'Pau later on of her illness. One of the Sirenites do, who reforms the Vulcan High Command. But you're totally right about the religious differences. It wasn't heavy, but it was there because they both pray to the same Sirach. Not pray to Sirach, but the same teachings, ostensibly.
She pointed it out. She was like, for someone who goes so against the teachings of Sirach, why do you have his likeness? And then they touched on how they do not reject his teachings.
Well, I'm sure you've met like
interpret it differently,
like mainline Christian fundamentalists and like the more Christian mystics who are kind of a bit more like hippie, like wild with it, a bit more alternative in their lifestyles. And I think it perfectly hit on that, and like that's why the manipulation worked so well, because you feel so much for T'Pau because she's such a reserved, isolated, forcibly emotionless person, and she is genuinely interested in these possible mystic understandings and interpretations of the religion that she follows, of the teachings that she follows. And it makes it hurt so much more that she's like willing to trust and willing to be kind of given to her curiosities.
And like even with the doctor even said, you know, it's not necessarily wrong for her to experiment with these things, but to maybe take it slow. And I think that's where the problem with this guy comes in, is that he's trying to push it all on her all at once, and then it obviously escalates.
Yeah. It was all through manipulation, though, like unfair manipulation. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. You know, having her not sleep that night, and then she tells him about how jazz music invigorated her, which makes perfect sense because jazz music is both incredibly logical and fundamentally illogical. I could see how that would just completely stimulate and warp a Vulcan's idea and concept of art, but gets her to open up that way. And also, before the forced mind meld occurs, he makes sure to get consent, but he also goes like, or we could just do some guided meditation, I mean, if you're not ready for it. Which is also within the language of rape, within the language of a person not being ready to engage in some sort of intimacy, some sort of intercourse of like, or we could just fool around and do something else if you're not, you know, mature enough to handle this. Like, that's the same kind of language that we've seen and heard of in our own lives. I thought they handled it really well, incredibly well. And then Stigma comes around and completely adds moral and political and sociological and the feminine complications to the entire thing. Because I love that everyone is telling her that she needs to come forward, and I could not agree with T'Pau's decision to remain silent more. I could not think it was more heroic. I could think there was more valor in it. And I love how they did the ending. I love how Eurus did go against her wishes, you know, because that had to happen narratively. Yeah. And I'm sure realistically that would happen as well. I love that Eurus went against her wishes and came out, but I also love at the same time they juxtaposed that with Archer remaining within T'Pau's wishes, saying, I don't think that my science officer wants to talk about it anymore, and that's enough for me. So we still get someone who is at least hearing these women, this woman's destroyed, this woman's wishes, and honoring them. So it's not about a man coming in and deciding what is right and doing what needs to be done. You get both options here. You get the guy who is just coming out and he's not only coming out and betraying her wishes, but he's also coming out as a mind melder, as a Cyrenite as well. So it's even more complicated there. He's not just standing up and going, "You need to come forward," like Archer Phlox and Eurus tell her through the whole thing, and she's, "No, you are all wrong, and I'm not going to say anything." Did you think that she was heroic in that? Like her understanding that if she came forward, she would be injuring a whole bunch of people. And that her,
yeah,
I
I definitely thought she was strong, but it's hard to say because it's like, it's self-sacrificial what she did.
Yes. I would say selfless.
Yeah, it's very selfless. But like, you want the best for her because like she did nothing wrong, but at the same time you completely understand where she's coming from. And it just makes you more upset with the way things
Absolutely
essentially are. I can't say the way things have to be, but with the way things had to be at the time.
There's nothing more heroic to me than this depiction of a woman who has been so compromised and so wronged, and then being able to remove her own ego from this situation in order to...
I would definitely say it puts it into... It's great that they used it as a metaphor as opposed to coming straight out with it, because it allows you to be a little bit more understanding rather than putting your, like, initial thoughts forward, because an initial reaction to a show that just straight up puts rape in front of you, it's a lot harder to sit there and think about it logically. It's a very emotional topic for
and this is one of the
vast majority of people. Yeah. So that they put it in to a metaphor so that you could approach it logically and not feel so emotionally attached. Because it's like you understand what the metaphor is, but you also understand that the act itself didn't happen.
Exactly.
So you can approach it in such a way. And I thought that was really smart.
It's one of the more compelling depictions of rape I've ever seen in popular media, because there's something like you're talking about. There's still a separation about it from like the gritty realness of anything else that tackles it. There's something even more to me, because it gives food for thought. If you watch something that was about realism, it would be a lot harder to have this kind of conversation. But since we're talking about it within the context of science fiction metaphors, we can talk about moral dilemmas, and we can talk about Vulcans. Like, we can talk about... it's just simpler terms.
I felt like it was a little more humanizing as opposed to being victimizing.
Yes.
It's not so black and white.
I never thought she was a victim in this. There's something so heroic about her.
Yeah, and most shows...
Not to say there's anything wrong with victims. I just love the way that T'Pol rose above her own to become like a hero, a warrior in defense of these people who she doesn't even have a good acquaintance with.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of like you don't feel bad for what happened to her, but at the same time, you don't have this overwhelming sense of pity getting in the way.
I did too, but I had to be strong like T'Pol was being strong. She kept it all inside, and she was very composed.
Mm-hmm.
I had to be as strong as she was. I had to act as she did, because she was also teaching me, like, something terrible happens to you.
Yeah.
Okay, how do we make this? How do we keep our integrity through this situation?
Yeah.
Things like that. Like, I learned a lot from her character in this episode. The best episode of Star Trek, you could learn a lot just from characterization. And also, a huge amount of praise goes to Jolene Blalock in this episode. Incredibly acted by her. I think she's a really underrated Star Trek actress. Underrated because she's ironically marginalized because of her obvious sex appeal. Like, that's why a lot of people marginalize her. But then she's one of the best actors on the show, especially when you watch episodes like Stigma and Fusion, where they put her into the... No one's put into this complicated a situation as she is, and she handles it with valor and with a lot of like, I would give her a lot of praise for these episodes.
Yeah.
And, it's just fascinating subject matter, and we were kind of nervous tackling these episodes, but I felt like we had to because, like I said, these are my favorite Enterprise episodes because they are the episodes that leave you speechless, that leave you because I love T'Pol. I want Talaris to be fucking castrated and tortured and like put through a meat grinder or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want the worst things to happen to that person.
And
But at the same time, T'Pol's resolve, T'Pol's decision to me is so heroic, and it's something that I can admire and follow, and it's something much stronger than what I would do.
I'd also say it was really clever on their behalf to have this situation with Vulcans because it gives you a chance to understand the emotional side of it, but not have it reflected on the screen so heavily for you. Because you understand that she's going through a lot, but expressively she's giving off an understanding of it. And therefore, like, you can have a better understanding of it yourself. Vulcans aren't insanely emotional
Oh no.
people. So
They practice in suppressing their emotions. They still have emotions, but
Yes.
their whole lifestyle is centered around suppressing them. And T'Pol has a wonderful emotionality in this episode. But it's all about remaining strong and true to her own ideals, no matter how many people tell her that she needs to come forward and name her attacker. And she stands her ground like so fucking heroically, man. Like Archer's telling her to, Phlox is telling her to, Eurus is telling her to, and she's refusing to bend to their wills because they don't understand the complexities of the situation or that she is in control of this. Like she is in control of this situation, and she was willing to take whatever punishment came out to her if it meant saving the stigmatization of an entire group of mystic people. Any final thoughts, Craig?
no, I think we touched up on just about everything. I think me mentioning the fact that they used Vulcans was my final thought.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that they chose T'Pol to tell these metaphors through. It's a wonderful thing. I think it flies in the face of a lot of fans too, because I was talking about it. She's marginalized for her appeal, for her attractiveness as well, and the clothes they have her dressed in, and choosing to have your sex symbol be the metaphor of rape in your show kind of makes, I hope, the fans shut the fuck up for a second and empathize with her rather than just judging her when she walks into a frame. So I think Brandon Braga and Rick Berman knew exactly what they were doing. Completely knew what they were doing. And I think that the entire show handled it very well with a lot of maturity and sophistication, and obviously is making us think about it, the moral dilemmas, and definitely made like T'Pol like a hero of mine. So I want to thank you guys for listening. Obviously, subscribe to the channel, like the video, in the comments below. What did you think of the episode Stigma and Fusion? They are pretty heavy episodes, but I love them. Thank you guys for watching.